Today on Newsday.
The paranoid guy in me, of course, I think initially with ChatGPT and generative AI, I'm like everybody else. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. It's going to be able to do all kinds of cool stuff. And then in my sort of next breath, I'm saying, oh, shoot, this might also go horribly wrong.
My name is Bill Russell. I'm a former CIO for a 16-hospital system and creator of This Week Health, where we are dedicated to transforming healthcare one connection at a time. Newsday discusses the breaking news in healthcare with industry experts. Now, let's jump right in.
Hey, it's Newsday, and today I am joined by the incomparable Sarah Richardson and the festive and fun dressed Drex DeFord today. So this is our end of year episode. Look at you, Drex. What? Wow.
Going to REI, picking up some stuff. All is good.
On
He's
the
in
new-
first place in the NFC West, so he can wear a Seahawks-ish shirt and totally get away with it.
The Seahawks and the 49ers are not the top news stories of the year, for sure. So,
No, not this year.
unfortunately for y'all. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to cover the top events for the past year, and then, I don't know, maybe give a little preview into what we think is going to happen next year. Let's throw out the two most obvious stories of the year, and that's Change Healthcare and CrowdStrike, right? Those were far and away incredibly impactful. Actually, what's interesting to me is Change was much more impactful than CrowdStrike, but CrowdStrike was more pervasive. So
Because it went beyond healthcare, for sure.
oh yeah. Delta's still trying to explain to people why they couldn't fly flights when most of the hospital systems I talked to on the CrowdStrike outage anyway were able to do surgeries that next Monday. It's almost as if, yes, something happened, their teams had to scramble, they had to work extra hours and whatever, but they didn't miss an appointment, didn't miss a surgery. And I don't know, Delta couldn't get a plane off the ground for whatever reason.
That story is interesting from the perspective of it was another one of those things that happened to us over the course of the year that really put people in a position to think through their third-party risk, the amount of reliance that they have on third parties. Change was really the first one. I think for some organizations, the Ascension hack, because of the relationship their health system may have had with Ascension, was another one. And then there were others. There were some blood systems that were third parties that were attacked. Third party risk and the impact that it has to our ability to deliver businesses. These aren't things that anyone in a health system does wrong. These are our partners that are having a problem that then impacts us. So resilience and business continuity really continue to push to the forefront this year.
So Sarah, you hosted a bunch of 229 events and city tours and whatnot. What I assume that ransomware, this third-party risk, is a very top-of-mind issue.
Not only is it top of mind issue, because Drex's point, you can have all of the best practices, some of the best policies and protocols in place. In the third-party scenario, these things are happening to you. It changes the way you think about downtime, or it changes the way you think about interruption of service. Because if you're down for 30 days, and that's what we continuously hear, you need to be prepared to be down for 30 days, which to me is a lifetime in patient care. And it's what some of our CIOs shared with us that, let's put perspective, when Change Healthcare happened, it took one organization 6 hours just to turn off the API that was feeding it because nobody had any documentation on how that API had been set up. Now, that's not uncommon. Documentation is nobody's favorite chore out there. And yet now, AI also being a major topic, if you're using any kind of coding protocols that allow you to throw in Copilot or others, they do the documentation with the coding. So there's no excuses going forward. And yet you realize, dang, it took us 6 hours to shut an API down. Another thing nobody planned for, enough triplicate forms for registration. So if you're going to be down for 30 days, you have to have enough registration numbers, and then you have to have enough registration forms. The things that nobody knows how to use anymore, per se. Like no one has a triplicate copy of something, and then planning for how long it takes to manually index all of the images that were taken and then stored locally and having to reintroduce those into your organization. It took an organization like a month with 250 extra hired hands to load all the images in. And in those moments, you only hope that the human doesn't make a mistake in indexing the image to the patient, as an example.
One is a clear example to me of architecture risk, and the other is a clear example of business risk. So change is business risk, and the CrowdStrike one is really an architecture risk. And when you think about it, it's fascinating to me. Like when this happened, people were like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize something had access to our kernel that could take down every Windows device." Now, I mean, Drex, you work for CrowdStrike. I'm very familiar with why it's built that way and why it functions that way. That's how it protects us. It operates at that level. But we never really thought about, oh my gosh, something could happen at that level of a machine and take them all down. That's hopefully gets us to think different about architecture moving forward. The business risk of change, I think, just absolutely put people on their backs. They were just like, oh my gosh, we can't process claims. We can't pay doctors. I remember talking to doctors during the middle of this thing, and they're like, I may go out of business. My practice might cease to exist. And it was a serious thing. And I just talked to probably one of the doctors I talked to early on about a month ago. And I said, hey, have you completely gotten through all that stuff? And he said, no. He goes, we made it through and we're functioning, but there's still residual stuff of claims that we're still processing and figuring it out. So the business risk there, let me talk a little bit more, because I don't get to talk on the Today Show anymore, so I have some words.
You can join us anytime as a guest, Bill.
As we look at the architecture risk, it got people to start saying things like, hey, maybe we should think about something other than a Windows PC as the core system. And we never heard that before. And now we're hearing some people say, hey, one of the things I like about using Macs in healthcare is it's built on Unix and it's built correctly. No Mac went down as a result of CrowdStrike. And on the business side, it's the thing I heard coming out of that is, hey, we're going to actually select two winners, the champion and the challenger. So you have an RFP, somebody wins and somebody's the challenger, and we're going to implement both of them because it's similar resources, similar things. And we're going to process 80% of our claims through one and 20% through the other and have the ability to come up and down. I like the fact that we are failing forward on this stuff. We're thinking, okay, how are we going to mitigate these things? Unfortunately, we don't really identify them until they happen.
Well, and then you have to have the means to do that. Like I've been fortunate enough to work in healthcare systems that were big enough to have diverse paths from a fiber perspective in case there's a backhoe that inevitably cuts access to your facility because of construction. Now we're talking about duplication of systems for that same level of resiliency. And so you're going through the process of app rationalization and archiving the things that you don't need anymore while you're trying to introduce two solutions for what might happen. So there's always this paradox that's occurring in the universe of CISOs and CIOs that, to me, that equation, what systems do you have two of in order to make sure that certain aspects of your care don't get affected? And then you still may have a ransomware attack, which could shut it down in a different way. So you're always chasing the equation of what is good enough.
It's really about risk, right? What you're saying there is, are we willing to accept the inefficiencies of running two systems that do the same thing? That's going to cost us more money and more people and maybe more time and lots of other stuff. Or are we willing to accept the risk and understand the risk and make sure that we understand the risk of going to a single system and using that because it's more efficient? I think about health systems. Would you intentionally go out and run both Cerner and Epic in your environment so that you had it just, at some point, it doesn't make any sense, right? It just logically doesn't connect. But I think there may be points where you decide that it's worth running two of something so that you have a backup plan. At the very least, you have a contract that's just idling in the background. You know what your backup plan would be should you have to make that shift.
All right. So the next story has to be generative AI. If nothing else, in terms of the just loudness of the number of stories. So we tracked about 2,200 stories this year, and we put them out on our site. They get sent out in our newsletter and whatnot. A full 20% of them are about AI and generative AI this year. But are we going to say this year was the year of generative AI, or is next year going to be the year of generative AI? Is the next 5 years going to be the year of, what is it actually? Let's start with, was this year the year of generative AI, or is it just we're recognizing its ascension this year?
Yeah, I'm going to go with, this was the year generative AI really climbed out of the cradle and started walking around the room, and we were all amazed. Hey, this little kid can actually get up and do some stuff. We haven't seen them get to elementary school soccer or the Olympics. So it's pretty impressive just to see.
And they're actually not a functioning person in society that has a job and is bringing in income. Is that what you're telling me?
Right. So it's pretty amazing to see. The three of us have been doing this for a long time. I don't think I've ever seen anything other than the internet took a long time to uptake, right? From the time we first started playing with the internet until people realized what it was capable of doing. I've seen this is generative AI has just been 10 times, 100 times that. It's gone so fast, so quickly. You can look back 2 months ago and think, wow, I can't believe where we are compared to where we were 2 months ago on some of these things. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, Sarah's not as old as you, so she may not remember the advent.
Oh no, I'm like laughing because I'm like, there was when you started having people that regularly traded in their pagers for cell phones and you had to manage the phone fleet. And then you had the per minute charge. Oh my goodness. Remember managing the minute pools and going from to people that had laptops and how big of a deal that was for people to get home and do that. And then you had the aging in of newer technologies and internet and the protocols we put in place and the monitoring we put in place. And I remember people filling out a special form to get internet access for certain departments. And then something like Gen AI, where it's probably one of those technologies that to me is so fascinating because it's gone faster than the ability to really think about how you get in front of it as thoughtfully as you would want to. And it's because of the ease of digital technologies today. So you could shut down the internet or only have certain people have access to it back in the late 90s, early 2000s. If you do that in a hospital today, everyone's using it on their personal devices and just emailing themselves the content and plugging it back in. There's no way to work around it anymore.
You can try to shut it off, but you're not going to be able to shut it off.
And it's in your email. The thing is fascinating to me is it's already embedded in so many things that we do. It just happened to get a different name this year. Whatever we call it in the future, I'm very optimistic about its capabilities. So many of our partners use it in workflows, and the workflows are about the automation that creates capacity for other tasks that allows you to either shut open recs or not so much reduce the headcount as to reallocate headcount to other needs in the systems because margin compression and payer mix and all those aspects are real. And until we know what happens with new policies from the new administration, we don't know if innovation continues at the pace that it has in healthcare, which is already slow to begin with, or if it goes back to just keeping the lights on because reimbursement continues to be stymied in certain spaces. And so it really may be the one thing that can continue at a rapid enough pace that we don't lose any ground we have gained, while also making people feel comfortable enough about it that the governance and the security and the resiliency that's required to do it responsibly is something we can all be proud of. So I'm all about it taking low-level tasks. We covered the article that says, don't put it in your ED right now. It's just not quite ready for ED decisions.
We'll talk about the election because I don't think the election was really a this year story. I think it's a next year story. So we'll cover what Doge means to healthcare because I talked to some CIOs and they're really concerned about it. But we'll get to that. We'll get to next year in a minute. Sarah, you hit the nail on the head, and Drex, you hit the nail on the head. I'm going to use that analogy, that metaphor over and over again. But Sarah, when we were bringing people onto the internet, we had to switch them from IPX to IP addresses. You remember that? Like we had to actually change the protocol because they couldn't get on, or we had to set up a gateway so that they could get on. They had to fill out forms. That's sort of the point. All the stuff was there. They had access to it the minute, and it happened at Thanksgiving, right? So something happened at Thanksgiving. Everyone became aware of ChatGPT. Then everyone started playing with it through Christmas, and then they're like, I could use this at work. And they did. They started using it at work. And Drex, your analogy is great because we were just sitting there going, oh my gosh, this thing could give me words.
It can do what?
It could put on this PowerPoint. It can write my RFP for me. Oh my gosh, this thing can. And we were just like, look at this baby walking around oh my gosh, this is amazing. I think when we get to the end of this year, though, we're sitting there going, oh, I see this. There's some limitations here. Like this baby still has a diaper on. Like it can still make mistakes. And these mistakes, as you say, Sarah, don't be like throwing generative AI around in the ED at this point. You've got to have the guardrails and the mechanisms around it. So I think you're right. I think this year is the year of our baby is walking. Isn't this amazing? It can summarize my emails. It can do some really neat and nifty things. I think next year, we're going to come right back to this for 2025 5 because I think this is one of the stories for 2025. I think this is one of
Yeah.
the predictions, unfortunately. Not unfortunately. I'll tell you why I don't think it's unfortunately. Everyone I talk to is, yeah, I'm going to talk about generative AI. I apologize for it. And then I'll ask them, what do you think the promise of generative AI is? They're like, oh, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. If we can solve these handful of things, the amount of automation we're going to get out of it, the amount of work that we're going to be able to lift off of people's cognitive load and let them practice medicine. There's a lot of optimism as to what it can do, and I guess that's where all the stories come from.
The paranoid guy in me, of course, and you've both heard me say this before. I think initially with ChatGPT and generative AI, I'm like everybody else. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. It's going to be able to do all kinds of cool stuff. And then in my sort of next breath, I'm saying, oh, shoot, this might also go horribly wrong. Like it can be used for a lot of bad stuff. So I'm a little torn on this, right? I don't think the cat's out of the bag now, really hard to put the cat back into the bag. And it's not just us using ChatGPT or generative AI, but it's all of our partners using generative AI. On Thursday, a new button shows up on your application that's a software as a service application, and you have a new capability. And you didn't even know about it. You didn't ask for it. You didn't know it was going to show up. It just showed up on the application. This is all terribly difficult to manage and govern. And hopefully we'll find our way through this and everyone will do the right thing.
I threw out the obvious stories of the year. Sarah, we'll start with you because you're always the most prepared for these things. I know Drex is just winging it over there in his blue Seahawks thing, but what's another story that jumps out at you from this past year?
What I really appreciated about this year were two aspects. Was the willingness for people to talk about mental health and mental health resources. And that's both from the provider perspective as much as how you are helping patients through their wellness and even sickness journey in some cases. And so we were able to uncover a lot of perspectives of the maternal mental health, of caregiver mental health, and what it means in different stages of providing care. Those that are providing hospice and elder care may have a harder time than someone providing care in a med-surg unit, as an example. And yet equally, there is a balance across the continuum. The other things we talked often about that I appreciate are both access and equity of services. Most of the CIOs that come on our show are concerned about access. So let's just say we're using generative AI to do a whole bunch of blasted messages for preventative care and wellness checks or end of year things that need to get taken care of. If all that goes exactly as intended, now you have, let's just make up a number, 500 people who need an appointment in a period of time, and there may not be enough physicians. And so what does your telehealth protocols look like? What are your ability to balance out the needs in your local markets and even beyond? Because the other piece is the merger, acquisition, divestiture aspect of everything happening. So all these things happening at the same time. And at the end of the day, we want people to have access to care, have quality outcomes, and have a trusted relationship with the health system that is serving their needs. That sounds simple, and it was one of the hardest things to solve for, and it will continue to be one of the hardest things to solve for, especially as we hit this massive amount of boomers that are coming into senior care, and so many ways to make sure technology is thoughtfully adapting to how they receive and expect care to be delivered, as much as the providers and caregivers doing that. All of those equations came together in really thoughtful and structured conversations that I believe if we take with the same level of intentionality, we'll have good outcomes because we're willing to talk about what it takes for that to be a true statement.
Those are awesome stories for this year. Drex, do you have another one to add?
For me, it's just Sarah hits on it too, but it's the number of mergers and acquisitions that we saw this year. And then all the other things that come from that. The Change Healthcare story really was a story about a merger and acquisition that didn't really get completely wrapped up and become complete. And it created an exposure that bad guys took advantage of. We saw health systems who were in the process of acquiring hospitals from other organizations. And when the big organization was breached, the acquiring organization struggled to figure out how do we accelerate our whatever Epic deployment or whatever to the new hospital so that we can get them out of that old situation. In the cybersecurity world, there were just a ton of acquisitions that happened from early stage companies to bigger companies. So everything's connected to everything else. That is definitely part of the challenge of the world right now, that not just the internet and computers and all that kind of stuff connection, but we're also dependent on each other's processes, that when we see a break in the supply chain, so to speak, the decision chain, so to speak, we wind up really creating a lot of chaos.
I'll close with these three very tech stories. One is the commoditization of ambient listening. I think it was a huge thing this year. Almost every health system that we talk to has moved from, hey, we have this for 100 doctors to whoever wants it can have it because the pricing went down significantly and the quality went up significantly this year. So
It happened really fast. It really happened fast from the beginning of the year to now, how the pricing has improved and how the technology has improved. It's gone really fast.
Yeah, and so those vendors are going to struggle next year. They have to differentiate themselves. It's the act of actually listening to a conversation and creating a note is complete commodity. And maybe somebody's 2% better, 1% better than somebody else. And we can argue that is huge in healthcare, but it's 1% and 2%. You are going to have to look at differentiation. I think the second thing for me is Epic rolled out 110 AI applications, and the health system doesn't have to know AI. They don't have to hire AI experts. It's in there. There's little dials for configuration, and it's in a sandbox, and they can roll it out. And I think we're seeing it. We're seeing that with ServiceNow. All those major platforms are rolling out AI in a way that I don't have to go out and hire teams to train models and build models. And maybe that was obvious to other people. It wasn't obvious to me when this year started, like how this was going to enter healthcare. And as we get to the end of the year, that's become fairly obvious. It is going to feel like a feature, like you were just saying, Drex. It's going to feel like, hey, you want to turn this one on? Go ahead, click this button. It's now on, and everybody has access to it. I think the third, and this one may not be as obvious, and it is we're changing how applications get delivered. And this may not have been a huge story per se, but when Epic rewrote their core infrastructure over the course of 10 years, took them 10 years, tells you how complex that was for them to take 10 years. But it's done now. And so things like Citrix are being moved out. I talked to more and more people who are just like, I might be able to get rid of my Citrix contract by the end of this year. I don't know about you guys, but for me, first of all, it was one of the most complex environments we had to manage. It was one of the most costly environments we had to manage. And it was really not the most stable environment. It was a pretty fragile environment. Like we had to keep, at a minimum, we had to keep rebooting individual sessions.
Virtual machines. Yeah.
But sometimes we had to reboot like whole servers and stuff. It was never like rock solid like a lot of the other stuff. I think those three things from just a pure tech side, those are three big movements this year.
Yeah, the Citrix thing, it definitely requires a lot of care and feeding to keep stable. And there are so many other interesting options technology-wise that, again, a year ago, probably were just beginning to become an idea that could be used. And 12 months later, these are scalable options for being able to get to that kind of an application without Citrix.
All right, we'll delve into this. You guys don't want to delve into this. Neither do I, actually. But we'll delve into this. We're going to start talking about next year. So each of us are going to get an opportunity to talk about what we think the trend is going to be for next year. But I want to talk a little bit about the election because I know this is top of mind. I've talked to a number of CIOs this week, and each one of them mentioned, we don't know what's going to get cut. One of the big themes of this administration is we are going to drive efficiency. And no one really, look, we're doing this in November. No one really knows what this is going to look like yet. You have Vivek and Elon saying we can be more efficient, but there's not a lot of specifics of what efficiency looks like. What do you think that does look like? I don't know which one of you wants to go first on this, but what are we just going to be guessing? Is it almost irresponsible to talk about what it might look like now? But I'll tell you, CIOs are thinking about it right now.
It's not irresponsible to think about it now because to me, this is no different than when you're sitting in a board meeting or a C-suite meeting and each team in your hospital is told to find X amount of dollars. Don't really care how, don't care if it's headcount reduction, don't care if it's app rationalization, don't care if it's new applications that can help increase margin. At the end of the day, you have to go hit this number. And I've heard a number of 2 trillion thrown out there for the federal government as an example. So depending on how they divvy it up, they're going to be like, each of you has to go find this amount of money. Where I'm hopeful there is synergy is that because there is such a sprawl of government programs, that if you're turning off one service over here in the lab, as an example, it doesn't affect something in supply chain adversely because you're both trying to achieve the same goal. So I liken it to running a hospital in that making sure that whatever changes are made are also understood the downstream effect. It can actually be very successful. Yet if everyone just goes in their bubble and goes and hits their numbers, you create a different set of problems for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's what worries me too, is the bull in a china shop approach that is our greatest fear and hopefully is not realized. On the cybersecurity side of the house, I can tell you that sitting down with CISOs a couple of weeks ago, a lot of concerns around what's going to happen to CISO, what's going to happen to a lot of the work that we've done the last few years. You would hope that cybersecurity would be a bipartisan issue and that keeping the country and healthcare safe would not be something that we would really argue about. But in this environment, it's hard to say. I hope we can keep that squared away and keep moving forward on a lot of the work that's happened over the past 10 years.
I'll close out this part of the conversation with a warning and then what I'd be focusing on if I was a CIO. So the warning is we see all these great videos of Elon Musk, and we appreciate the fact that he fails forward. But I wouldn't want him running my hospital. He talks about efficiency and he's like, yeah, we went through the Tesla assembly line and we automated everything we could. And then we figured out what broke and then we backed some of those things off and then we did this, right? That's his approach. If you don't have to back off of some of this stuff, you haven't gone far enough. I don't want him doing that in healthcare. I don't want him going, oh, bummer, that was too far. So I'm afraid of that. Here's what I'd be thinking about if I was a CIO. And actually, some of this came directly from a conversation I had with a CIO. And it is, they're going to be looking for cuts. Cuts are going to impact the health system. And as you said, Sarah, it's percentage here. Here's the things we do know. We know that there's going to be a physician shortage no matter what they do. There's going to be a nursing shortage no matter what they do. There's going to be burnout no matter what they do. We're going to be caused to pick up the slack in some areas no matter what they do. Therefore, knowing what I know about the health system and being the CIO, I would be driving as much automation and efficiency as I possibly could. You have to create margin. We talk about this in our leadership course. And you have to create margins. One of the things that CIO does for the organization is utilize technology to create that margin for the clinicians, for the nurses, across the board. That's how I'd be thinking about it. Next year, if you, right now, 2025, what do you think is going to be the story next year based on what you've seen this year? Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm going to steal some of Drex's thunder because let's be honest, everything we talk about now is through a lens of cyber, which I am so grateful for because I remember 20 years ago, going and hand doing the audits, like some of the other things, and making sure that access and identity management was appropriately administered, that people were getting their access removed within 24 hours. Some of the more simple protocols that came out there and how phishing attempts were happening and password resets and being able to just introduce things like multi-factor authentication and single sign-on. And yet, here we are literally 20 years later, when some of the things that can protect you the most easily are things like, I don't know, multi-factor authentication as an example. So cyber is going to stay at the root of the conversation, except that now it's not just the people in the basement or the guys over here in the corner talking about it. So I would say that cybersecurity as a core strategic priority is going to be a conversation we will have often. And like Drex does so thoughtfully, putting it in plain English and talking about what that means for people, both at work and at home. If security is literally embedded into every layer of technology operations, from your EHR all the way to your IoT-enabled medical devices, then that continuum is a conversation that everybody can have, much like how AI is being trained in some organizations across the continuum, because we're going to see AI-driven operational and clinical enhancements. There's a huge level of enterprise level deployments and adoption in 25. We have to be able to create the margin we're talking about. And the last piece, and this is something we do topically as well, is focus on resilient and scalable cloud operations. So if cloud adoption continues to expand, then CIOs can prioritize the resiliency, the scalability, and the hybrid models that dominate organizations to create the needs for both on-premise solutions for critical workflows and flexibility of cloud-based tools. So all of those things are dependent upon one another. So if you had to ask me right now, I'm going to say cybersecurity core strategic priority, AI-driven operational clinical enhancements, and focusing on resilient and scalable cloud operations.
She took all three. Those are all really good. They're really good.
You're going to have others. You two always have others. So that's what I love is now we have 5 predictions or 10, or just pick your favorite.
You know what, Sarah? Those are exceptional. I'll change mine. Drex, what do you got?
At a very high level, I'll go along with you on AI. I think we're going to look back a year from now and we're just going to be like, wow, there's some crazy things that have happened with AI. There's somebody this year that's going to try to do surgery without a surgeon, or they're going to do something really insane. And so we're going to see some cool stuff happen with AI, and hopefully it's done thoughtfully. I also think we almost just can't avoid it. We'll have another Change Healthcare like event this year in 2025. And I don't know what it is or what it might be, but I think that's also part of the problem. When we went through COVID and we decided to go to a lot of software as service and outsource a lot of these capabilities, we built this web of relationships and connections that we don't really have well documented or understand. And there's a booby trap in there somewhere, and somebody somehow will wind up stepping on it. So we'll have something, hopefully not, but I think we'll have something bad happen to us in 2025. And then on the regular cybersecurity stuff too, I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and in cybersecurity, we can't do everything. A lot of our programs need a lot of work, and it's going to take time to get there. So we're told to eat the elephant one bite at a time. But the analogy the person used was, how can I eat it one bite at a time when the elephant is actually standing on top of me and just kicking the crap out of me? So that's another real challenge that I think we kind of face in the world that we're in today.
Drex, you win the metaphor challenge this week. The
It's
elephant
not
is
mine. I
actually,
stole it from somebody.
no, the elephant is actually in the room and standing on my chest. Eat it one bite at a time. That's not going to cut it.
Start with the foot. I don't know.
It seems silly to say 2025 will be the year of AI since 2024 was the year of AI, like recognizing that it was here. I think AI is moving. Let's use dog years as an example. Dogs, 7 years to every 1 year. It feels to me like this thing is moving at a pace of, I don't know, like at least 7 years for every 1 year.
Yeah, it's like
And
inverse dog years. Yeah.
yeah, and it's the amount of money that's going after it. It's global money. It's not just a Silicon Valley thing, global money. Defense money's going after it. Every industry's going after it. It like almost can't help itself but to go this fast. And so I really do believe we're just going to continue to see Epic roll out another 200 things that it can do. And the same with the rest of the players that are out there. We're going to see it show up and do some really incredible things. And we're going to get better at the stuff we have now. Like we used to talk about prompt engineers. I don't think we're going to be talking about prompt engineers next year. I think it's going to be prompting itself, or it's going to be giving us the prompts to prompt it. And we're already seeing this agentic AI where you have one agent that's has these 50 things underneath it, a little bit like how the brain works. And it's, hey, that's a math problem. I'm going to give it to Drex. Hey, that's a sociology problem. I'm going to give it to Sarah. She has more EQ than Drex. And that's a nerd problem. I'm going to give it to Bill. It like literally the agents are going to go, I'm going to use that model and it's going to bring it all in. And the crazy thing was I was introduced to that concept this year. And then I'm watching as much NVIDIA stuff as I can. Any
I
YouTube
know.
video on NVIDIA I watch. Because they do the Drex thing, right? They explain it in plain English. It's really well done. And when I get done, I go, oh my gosh, I was just introduced to this in June. And now they're like talking about full-blown architecture systems out there. They're talking about use cases and case studies and stuff. I'm like, as a CIO, so next year we will absolutely be talking about AI. On the cyber side, I think we're going to see, I don't know if Drex, you and I had this conversation all those number of years ago when Trump was president the last time. I think they're going to modernize the military. And in doing that, I think they're just going to dump a ton of money into the military on cyber. I think they're going to train a ton of people, which they already are training a ton of people on cyber. But I think we're going to see a different approach to cyber. It really isn't acceptable. Every health system you go to, you can look at their logs, and they've been attacked by nation states around the world every day, every minute, every second. They're being attacked. And if that was happening in Southern California, but with airplanes, we'd send carriers. But it happened
Right.
underneath, over the internet, and we don't respond to it. And I think we're going to see a different approach to this, maybe next year, but definitely over the next couple of years. I think we'll see a different approach to how we think about protecting American companies from these attacks. Who knows? But yeah, that's my bold prediction. Next year will be the year of AI. What do you
I
think?
think what's interesting. So I did a story on this Minute Drill, and it was about the GPT thing, right? Where on the cybersecurity side of the house, somebody had spun up a set of GPTs and said, go figure out how to take this 0-day vulnerability and turn it into something we could actually use to penetrate an organization, make some money. And one of the GPTs acted as the project manager, and the other GPTs worked on individual channels of the problem, right? And when one of those GPTs got overloaded because that problem became too difficult, the project manager spun up a new GPT. And this is a thing that's actually been done now. And I don't remember the numbers, but hugely more efficient in being able to turn that 0-day into something they could actually use to take action on a good guy. We know it's being done just as an experiment. There's got to be tons of people that are getting ready to do it in the business and clinical and research world.
I don't know about you guys, my investments now. I go online with my investments, and there's all sorts of AI that analyzes information I never would have been able to analyze before.
You wouldn't even have known to ask the question, right?
True.
That's the other cool thing that's happening, is that you didn't know you could answer that question, so you never even asked it. And then somebody's showing, hey, you want to see this information? Yeah, I do, but I didn't know you could show it to me. I didn't know I could even ask that question.
What's the future of This Week Health look like for next year? Any predictions, any forward-leaning statements? Sarah, we'll start with you. You're wondering what you can and cannot say, aren't you?
No, I'm actually thinking about the things I learned that stuck the most this year, especially from the things that Drex and I chat about. And I'm like, hey, don't give away your DNA. So something
yeah.
most people have done.
That's
Change
a
your
huge
passwords.
thing.
Change complex passwords often, and don't use public Wi-Fi. And that sounds like really remedial kind of tasks. And yet we've been playing with all kinds of Gen AI. One of our awesome chair CIOs was like, hey, I want to help you promote this one program. All she did was feed what we had online into a program, and it creepily sounded like us talking about it. You throw in that,
the Google's Notebook LM.
yeah, I was like, whoa, that sounds like me and Drex. And then if you take that and we use a couple things you showed us and you said, hey, this is really cool. It creates an avatar of yourself. So now you have your voice on file and then your picture on file, and you feed it a script that you've written. And all of a sudden there you are, except that you used ChatGPT to go and make sure, Perplexity or Claude or whomever, to make sure, like, what happens to my data? And we talk about data escrow and data protection a lot in our cyber and just risk programs. And here we are. If you don't buy the enterprise version, then they own you. And that's just like having your DNA. So what worries me that people don't always think about, and this is about being a little paranoid all the time, let's just pretend your DNA is out there and now you didn't go buy the enterprise version of this generative video AI tool. Now your DNA and your likeness are out there. And so, Twilight Zone episode, do you exist?
Actually, that's
Because someone else just created you. Maybe you created yourself. You gave you away.
That's a great connection. The 23andMe, you got something back for it. You felt good, and you were able to do some things with it and whatever. And then 23andMe goes bankrupt, and now they're potentially selling those assets, which is your DNA signature and that kind of stuff. Think about some of these things where you're going, all right, I'm going to create an avatar based on me. Oh, that company went bankrupt. My avatar just got sold to fill in the blank, and now they're using my avatar for their marketing campaign.
Even more interestingly, there's some new tech out now. I think I just posted a story about this on the news side, but it takes your voice. If you have a lot of recordings, it actually takes your voice and your intonation, and it can turn it into you speaking Japanese. So now you have an avatar of you speaking Japanese and selling whatever it is you're selling into the Asian market, right? And these are all things you can just do now.
You can just do. Future of This Week Health, you think the three of us are going to go on long vacations and just use the Hey Gen avatar and do Newsday and that kind of stuff?
I don't know about a long vacation. We have a pretty packed schedule next year.
I know.
Have fun because everyone's, oh, you get to travel for work all the time and see all these great cities. I'm like, when you go from Boston to Philadelphia to Buffalo, you probably see the Marriott and you see the airport. Now, what I do love about us that will always be true is we make it fun. Even on the hardest travel days, you get delayed or things happen and things don't always go as intended and planned. I don't know that we've ever had a bad time doing what we do because we're about relationships. And that starts with the core of our culture we have here at This Week Health. We're all genuinely friends. And so therefore, no matter what we're facing, whether it's some kind of an AI hack or it's a plane delay, we take it in stride because people expect us to. And when you have people you can count on, then you get to do that in stride. And so I'm grateful for what we've created for other people based on the foundation we have within ourselves.
Can I give a couple of the forward-leaning stuff?
Yeah, do it.
Yes.
The first thing I would say is we're going to double our commitment to Alex's Lemonade Stand. So We raised 120,000 this year, and we're going to shoot for 200 next year. So we went from 50 the first year to 100 the second year. We're going to try to do 200, and towards that end, we will be hosting a golf tournament at HIMSS. If you happen to be at HIMSS, we would love to have you be a part of it. It's the Sunday before all the executive sessions happen on Monday. So if you could come into Vegas on Sunday for that, we would love to have you be a part of that. So we're going to double that. That's a big thing. We're doing 20 summits next year at different topics. Some of them are children's CIOs and AMC CIOs and whatnot, because we try to put people in a room with similar problem sets and whatever. But we're also doing AI. Like, we're doing topical around AI. We're doing cloud and infrastructure is another one we're doing. I think we're doing 4 CISO events. Is that true?
Correct. Yeah, 4 CISO summits.
Which is great. And we're doing over 30 city tour dinners. So we're going to be coming to a city near you and essentially gathering 15 IT executives in a room. And we're going to conduct our conversations, maybe a little bit like this conversation. What's top of mind? What's going on? Give you a little feel for what the 229 project looks like and feels like. And then, of course, we have our special project, which we are intimating about, and we're actually so excited about. And you'll hear more about that as December progresses. We will start to drip feed some really fun stuff all December. So by the time this airs, they might already know what's going on. We'll see.
I thought you would give us a little bit more on that. I thought you might just dive in just another couple of drops.
Drex, since you're twisting my arm, we've identified 2 things. One, that we really believe. The one thing we believe is that we have seen over the years that there's been a weird adversarial type relationship that's built up between vendors, partners, and CIOs. And it's because essentially we've just created it over the years. We bombard CIOs with emails. In some cases, we have unscrupulous sales reps who are promising things that can't be delivered and whatnot. And we've taken it upon ourselves to create some development and certifications around that. And we want to elevate that conversation and that dialogue between those 2 entities. And we feel like we're uniquely positioned to do that. And so the 3 of us have created over 5 hours of training for sales executives. And we've also gotten some people from the 229 community to participate and share their secrets. Hey, what has worked? We have some sales executives who have just countless decades of experience.
Right.
We're going to share it with you in the certification. And we have some CIOs who are just going to say to you, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody I can trust, somebody who brings this to the table and that. So we're going to be doing that. And I'm excited about that. The other one we're going to do is, I was talking to some CIOs at one of our 229 project meetings, and I said, train you, not train you. You guys know what you're doing. You're fairly professional, and you don't really need me to tell you how to do your job. But I believe that all of them could use help training that manager level throughout their entire organization. And our thesis on that is, if we elevate all the managers in all the health systems across the country just a little bit, that's going to have an exponential effect on all of healthcare. And so we've put together, again, about 6 hours of training, certified healthcare technology manager training, and it's on leadership, culture, and teams. So it's how to effectively run a team, how to identify leaders and build your team of leaders and grow as a leader, and then how to build a culture that will help people get to thrive in that environment. So I went from barely saying anything to saying just about everything, right?
Good job. I love it. Yeah.
Now the cat's out of the bag. That's what we're doing. Keep an eye out. We'll put stuff out in our email. If you haven't signed up, hit our website and sign up to get our emails, and we'll make sure that you're aware of that stuff when we launch it. It will be early next year, and we are really excited about it. And this year is the year of Drex and Sarah joining This Week Health, and I couldn't be more grateful. This has been a great year. This is definitely a situation where with 1 + 1 has equaled 20. We've done amazingly more things than I could have ever imagined. We've reached more people. We've had more discussions. This is exactly the picture we had when you guys have been advisors for as long as anybody. When we were talking about this before, I would say these things and you're like, how are you going to do this by yourself? And now you know how I'm going to do it by myself. I'm going to have you guys do it with me.
I'm not going to do it by myself. Yeah.
I'm not. There's no way you can do it by yourself. So it's been great. We've had some great conversations, and I appreciate you guys. And here's to a great 2025.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Newsday. There's a lot happening in our industry, and while Newsday covers interesting stuff, another way to stay informed is by subscribing to our daily insights email, which delivers expertly curated health IT news straight to your inbox. Sign up at thisweekhealth.com/news. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.